I'm a middle child of three brothers. There are two of them. Both were scouts as they grew up. My older brother earned his Eagle Scout rank. My younger brother dropped out during his Boy Scout years. But for some reason, my parents never pushed me into scouting when I was young. That's strange because I clearly recall feeling quite envious of my older brother Scott whenever my mom would take me along to the Pinewood Derby events and celebrations. However, what I envied most about what I missed were the campouts. When the troops would head into the wilderness for an entire weekend of camping. Once or twice, I came along for the ride. I watched them setting up camp and building campfires. But since I was younger and not part of the troop, I don't think I was allowed to stay overnight. So, I'd go back home with my parents. My jealousy of these trips was mostly aimed at my older brother, since I watched him get ready for those camping weekends. Before each trip, he'd bring home a tent to practice setting up in the backyard. Though I was only 7 or 8, I still vividly remember how excited I got when I came up with the idea of camping in our own backyard. The plan was simple: pitch the tent in the yard and sleep there overnight. Music, to my young mind, that was the most thrilling concept ever. Also, our yard wasn't exactly a typical one. Our childhood home sat in a spacious neighborhood where yards blended together without many fences. Instead, there were big clusters of trees and brush between properties, which added to the outdoor feel. Our yard was large too, and we had a fire pit. So our parents went along with it and lit the fire pit for us to give us the real camping vibe. My little brother joined us for marshmallow roasting, but our parents weren't about to let him sleep in the tent. He was only about 4, and it wasn't safe. And no, he wasn't a scout yet, obviously. He was 4. Once it got late, our parents took him inside and told us to start winding down for bed. Around that time, the Game Boy SP was my handheld of choice. So once we were in our sleeping bags, Scott and I pulled out our Game Boys and played our own games. I was on Super Mario Bros. 2, a game I loved but could never beat as a kid. But as I grew more tired, I rolled onto my side and tried to fall asleep. However, I remember not being able to drift off. I was worn out but restless. Maybe it was because I'd never used a sleeping bag before, and honestly, it wasn't cozy. A long time passed, a really long time, before I finally dozed off. Then I woke up, probably disoriented at first, not recognizing where I was. I glanced around the dark tent and noticed something. Scott was nowhere to be seen. His sleeping bag lay empty. The tent zipper was still shut, though. He must have gone inside because he couldn't sleep. I suddenly felt too frightened to stay in the tent alone, so I got up and unzipped it. But before crawling out, I took a small, innocent peek outside, simply because I was too scared to dash across the yard without making sure it was safe. But it wasn't. I saw someone seated by the fire pit in the darkness. It wasn't Scott. It was a grown man. He was facing the tent, and surely he'd spotted me. I gasped, zipped the tent back up, and scrambled back into my sleeping bag, as if that thin fabric offered any real protection. I lay completely motionless inside my bag. The tent was nearly pitch black, save for a faint gray glow from the moonlight seeping through the material. I don't know what I was thinking at that moment, but I do recall wanting to call out Dad, hoping it was him. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I had glimpsed the man, even briefly, and if it had been my father, he would have reacted to me poking my head out. That's when I heard the chair by the fire pit shift. I was frozen, praying the man wouldn't stand up, and if he did, that he wasn't heading toward the tent. But I could now see a shadow on the other side of the tent blocking some of the moonlight. He was right outside. Somehow, I thought if I stayed still, he might think the tent was empty. Then I heard the zipper slowly pulled downward. It moved just a few inches. The opening was small, but it was enough. I couldn't help it. I turned my head just slightly. There's a small gap at the bottom of most tents where the zipper doesn't fully close. I'd never noticed it before that night, and I was pressed against that gap, just one eye staring straight at me. I could see the white of it in the darkness. At first, I couldn't even scream, not for a few seconds because I was paralyzed. Then I squinted slightly, as if the person was smiling a smile I couldn't see. The zipper moved another inch, and that's when I finally let out a scream. I scrambled backward, kicking out of my sleeping bag, knocking into the tent poles. I heard footsteps immediately take off across the yard. Our back porch light flicked on, visible through the tent fabric. My dad burst out the back door, shouting. I could hear him running across the grass. By the time he reached the fire pit area, whoever it was had already vanished. My parents called the police, of course. I don't recall much after my parents spoke with the officers. I know I went to my parents' room with my mom. Eventually, the police did their search of the area. It was an absolute nightmare. I slept in my parents' bed that night. I was emotionally shaken for a while, just as things seemed to be returning to normal, maybe a few weeks to a month later. This next part is what really seals this memory as something I'll never forget. I went to Catholic school, and during lunch we'd have a short recess in the schoolyard, which was all concrete. The far end of the yard was fenced off and faced the street. We were playing some game, red light, green light, maybe. I genuinely don't recall. All I know is I had to run to the fence to be safe from whatever the game's threat was. While I was at the fence, next to other kids, a man said, "Hey," from the other side. I turned, and it was a man asking for directions to some place I don't remember. I said, "I don't know." We weren't even supposed to talk to strangers outside the yard. Then he said, "Your name's Chris, right?" That moment is burned into my brain. His voice, his expression, and my stomach dropping. I said no, lying to him. He then smiled and said, "You don't remember me, do you?" At that point, I ran toward one of the recess chaperones and pointed at the fence, but the man was gone. One of the kids next to me confirmed he'd seen him too. The recess ladies called everyone in early, and the school contacted my parents. I was certain it was the man from the backyard. I was taken home early that day. I know my parents were sick with worry after that. It was a horrible month. We lived in such a nice neighborhood too, and being nearly driven out of it because of this was just a nightmare. After months of my parents keeping close watch over me, things eventually went back to normal. I can't emphasize enough, though, how much it still aches in my chest thinking about how I could be dead today if that man had somehow succeeded in taking me. And it disturbs me wondering if he ever succeeded with someone else. I grew up in Salem, Oregon, a quaint little town with a small town feel. I moved out when I was 21, buying my first house about 50 miles outside Salem. I furnished that house with a mix of stuff from my parents, their friends, and plenty of things from online marketplaces and apps. At the time, I drove a Ford Raptor, so hauling items was thankfully easy. One day on Facebook Marketplace, I came across a listing selling a bunch of appealing items. The ones that caught my eye were a cream-colored sectional couch that looked brand new and a Cannondale mountain bike. I didn't own a bike then, and where my house is, having one is great for exercise. The other items in the listing didn't really grab me. The listing was basically a digital yard sale. I reached out to the seller, and we did the usual back and forth. He was fairly brief and direct with his replies, and surprisingly easy to bargain with. He agreed to a slightly lower price and said I could pick the items up later that night. Days are long in Oregon during summer, so I'd still have some daylight when I arrived. I figured I'd need a couple trips to move the sectional because of its size. I set out toward the house. The address was right on the coast. I checked the satellite view on the map to confirm it led to a house, and it did. According to the map, there was a long trail or driveway that branched off the road toward a large open property with a big-looking house, and behind it, a sheer drop-off to the ocean. All I could think was, no wonder these people were selling stuff so cheap. With that kind of money, I wondered why they weren't just giving it away. I headed out that way, and it didn't take long to get there. I could tell the closer I got to the shore, the nicer the properties became. Then I turned onto the last road before the driveway to the house. This road stretched on. It was lined with woods on both sides, passing the occasional driveway, likely leading to a cliffside mansion. Eventually, I reached the turnoff. It was a tree-lined dirt road, the driveway, I suppose. About 10 seconds in, it opened into a massive clearing. The driveway sloped slightly upward toward the house at the top of the hill. I pulled up next to an older sedan, a Mercury Sable or something. It didn't fit the house at all. Like, this house looked like it belonged to a millionaire, and that car was a piece of junk. I went up to the front door ready to ring the bell, but there was a yellow sticky note on it that said, "Doorbell broken. Please use back door." Weird, since I could have just knocked, but I followed it. As I walked off the front porch, I messaged the guy on Messenger that I'd arrived and was heading around back. I walked along the side of the house, glancing at each window as I passed, but all the blinds seemed shut. I reached the backyard, and it was incredible. It actually overlooked the Pacific Ocean. I stepped onto the back deck to knock on the back door. It was a sliding glass door with some kind of sliding blind closed, so I couldn't see inside. I knocked on the glass. I stood there for a minute, then knocked again. I checked my phone to see if he'd answered or read my message. Neither. I went to sit in one of the deck chairs and spun it around to watch the sunset and the ocean view. It was surreal. I kept checking the Messenger app and following up with the guy, but he wasn't responding. I triple-checked that I had the right address, and I did. Plus, the note on the front door confirmed it. I figured if he was in the shower or busy, I'd at least walk over to the cliffside and snap a picture of the view. So I did. I walked down the deck, then across the seemingly freshly cut grass to the cliff, taking in the scenery. I daydreamed about one day affording a place like that. I started walking back to the house, but stopped maybe 3 steps in when I noticed every single window now had their blinds open, and a person stood at each one, as still as statues. I wasn't sure if I was looking at some kind of prank. I moved a little closer, and the moment I thought, "Nope, I've seen enough," was when I realized every face was smiling. I honestly couldn't tell if they were mannequins. They were so motionless. I decided I just needed to get to the car. I jogged lightly around the side of the house again, and that side window that had been shut before now had its blind lifted, and there was music somewhat at that window too. I didn't know what was going on, but I had to leave. As I reached the front, I got back in my car and didn't even glance at the front windows. I didn't want to know if there were people there too. I reversed all the way down the driveway, and regrettably, I had to take a curious look back at the house at one point. The front door was open, and a man stood on the porch with his hands in his pockets, watching me drive away. It didn't matter. Everything about this was a red flag. I was out of there in a minute and down the road. The guy still never opened or responded to my message. I decided to pull into the nearest neighbor's driveway and knock on their door. They answered, and I explained the bizarre and disturbing situation I'd just witnessed, pressing them for any info on their neighbor. The man who answered, I'll call him Tom, was shocked because he's close friends with the guy next door, and he said he's rarely in town and wouldn't set up some elaborate prank like that. He called his neighbor on the spot, and the guy picked up. Basically, the conversation went like this from what I recall. "Hey, Jim, it's Tom next door. Listen, I've got someone at my door saying you invited him over to buy stuff, but you pulled some scary prank with the windows and stuff." Snorts, and there was a pause before Tom said, "What are you talking about?" From there, I stepped in and explained everything from the Facebook ad to my arrival and the people of the windows. He now sounded very concerned because he said he wasn't home that week. I described every detail I could, including what the man on the porch looked like and the sketchy car. He asked me to take his number so he could contact me after the police investigated. After that, I left. I went home. I honestly didn't have the energy to commit 2 hours to a police investigation that didn't involve me, to be honest. But I did hear from the guy later that night. He called and asked me to send him the Facebook listing, but it was gone. I sent him the profile details I'd been messaging on Messenger, but it was now a blank profile. He thanked me and said he'd pass it to the police anyway. When I asked what the cops found, he told me they found nothing stolen as far as he knew at that time, and all the blinds were closed again with no sedan in the driveway, but all 3 doors in the house were unlocked. Now, the scary part to me is how they stood at the windows smiling, trying to frighten me. And I have to wonder, what use was I going to be to them, and why did they want me in the backyard? Honestly, frightening thoughts. I'm just glad I left when I did. I live with my parents in Murraysville, Pennsylvania. My parents were away one weekend, so I decided to have a bunch of people over in the backyard for a small pool party. We have a pool house and an in-ground pool out there. It's perfect for parties, even though I rarely get to host any. The rest of the yard has some grass and then woods behind the pool house. It's a very private backyard. Usually, you'll see what I mean soon. So, the little party I planned was for Saturday night. Earlier that day, I was setting things up outside. It was a bit cloudy, but since it was a night party, that didn't matter much. The woods behind the pool house are quite large. They extend at least half a mile before reaching another backyard. So, no one should be walking through them. It's also our property. No trails or any reason for anyone to be back there. I was carrying out folding tables for beer pong and refreshments when I heard a cough come from the woods. It was clearly a slow, throat-clearing type of cough, like someone trying to clear their throat. And it was definitely a man. I froze, music with the table still in my hands. I just stood there listening. The wind barely moved the leaves, so the sound carried clearly. It came from just inside the tree line, not deep in the woods. Close enough that whoever made it could definitely see me. I slowly set the table down and looked out toward the trees. Confused is one word, but unsettled would be better. No one should ever be in those woods. I scanned the tree line and called out, "Who is that?" No answer. Not even any movement. No footsteps or branches snapping. That almost made it worse. If it were some random guy walking through, I should have heard him moving away. But it was just quiet. I got that feeling in my chest like I was being watched, like someone was standing perfectly still just behind a tree staring at me. I stood there for maybe 20 seconds, just listening. The longer I stood, the more uncomfortable I felt. Eventually, I grabbed the rest of the stuff and brought it back inside for a bit. I didn't want to stand out there alone anymore. I called my good friend Mark to come over early and help me set up. I decided not to mention the cough. I didn't want to sound paranoid before the party even started. Mark came over around 6 p.m. He brought some drinks and helped me finish setting up. I kept glancing at the woods while we were out there, but everything looked normal. Nothing moved. If someone had been there earlier, they were gone. The rest of my friends started showing up around 7 to 8 o'clock. At the peak, there were at least 20 people. Nothing crazy, but it was a good time. Music played, people swam, lights lit up the patio. With that many people, the woods didn't feel creepy anymore. A couple times during the night, I caught myself looking toward the tree line, though. I don't even know why. I guess that cough just stuck with me. Things wound down around midnight, and by 1 a.m., the last guest had left. I figured I'd leave the cleanup for tomorrow. I was tired and ready for bed. Before going inside, I did one last slow sweep of the backyard. I walked around the pool, checked behind the pool house, looked toward the woods again. Everything seemed normal. The water in the pool was still, lights reflecting off it. No one out there. I locked the back sliding door and went upstairs to brush my teeth and go to bed. I was in bed scrolling on my phone for maybe half an hour before putting music down. It probably took another half hour of lying there trying to sleep when I heard a splash. Not a small one. Not like something falling in. It sounded exactly like someone jumping into the deep end. My eyes shot open immediately. I held still, listening. A few seconds later, I heard the sound of someone swimming. Literal strokes through the water. My first thought was maybe someone from the party stayed behind as a joke, or they just woke up drunkenly. But I knew everyone who came. No one would do something like that. I checked my phone, and it was 2 a.m. I got out of bed and walked slowly to the window overlooking the backyard. I didn't turn on any lights in my room. I didn't want whoever was out there to see me before I saw them. When I looked down at the pool, I saw guys swimming calmly from one end to the other. At first, I tried to recognize him. I knew all 20 or so people who came over. This wasn't any of them. I leaned closer to the glass. The pool lights lit up his face just enough for me to know, for sure, I'd never seen him before. I yelled out the window, "Who is that?" The swimming stopped immediately. He looked up slowly toward my window. Even from that distance, I could tell he wasn't confused or startled. He just stared up at me. Then he started moving toward the shallow end. He climbed out of the pool, and that's when I saw how tall he was. He stood there dripping wet for maybe 2 seconds, just looking toward the house. I expected him to run away. Instead, he started walking toward the sliding door. Not running or hesitating, just walking fast and direct like he already knew where he was going, almost in a march. I yelled again, "Hey, who is that?" He didn't respond. I heard the sliding door downstairs open. I know I locked it. I'm positive I did. But I heard it slide open. Then it slid shut. I ran to my bedroom door and locked it. That's when I noticed how much my hands were shaking. I grabbed my phone and texted Mark asking if he noticed anyone stay behind before leaving. But I didn't wait for a response. I immediately called 911. I whispered into the phone that there was an intruder in my house. I gave my address as quietly as I could. Then I heard the footsteps. They were slow, wet footsteps on hardwood. I could hear the slight stick of his feet lifting off the floor. He wasn't rushing, nor was he searching randomly. He was walking directly toward the stairs. Each step on the stairs creaked, one at a time. He reached the top. The hallway floor outside my room creaked. He stopped right outside my bedroom door. I could hear water dripping onto the floor. Then the handle moved. He tried opening it once, then twice, then a third time, harder each time. When he realized it was locked, there was a long pause. The 911 operator was saying something, but I had the phone set down. I could barely focus on what she was saying. Then the guy knocked on the door, 3 slow knocks. I picked up the phone and put it on speaker. My voice was shaking, but I said loudly that I was on the phone with the police and they were on their way. There was another long pause. Then a man's voice from the other side of the door said, very low and calm, "It's me. Open the door." He sounded like a grown man in his 30s. I said, "I know that I don't know you. Leave now." There was silence again. 5 seconds, maybe more. Then I heard him turn and walk away quickly. I heard his wet footsteps go back down the hallway, then down the stairs, and a few seconds later, I heard the front door downstairs open and slam shut. I didn't move until the police arrived. When I finally went downstairs with them, there was a clear trail of water leading from the back door, up the stairs, all the way to the bedroom door. After searching the entire house, that was the only proof that he had ever been there. I texted everyone I invited asking if they stayed behind or noticed anyone else stayed behind. Anyone who was still awake said no. The rest texted back in the morning, saying no. It was a complete stranger. And I have a feeling that cough I heard in the woods earlier that day was that man. I don't know how he got the door unlocked. Maybe he slipped in during the party when people were going in and out. As for motive, I have no idea. I just know that if I didn't wake up when I did, or if I opened that bedroom door, I don't know what he would have done.